So I can talk about some cars now. I can actually talk about some motorsport and not politics. Really? I can do that now? Great. Awesome. Hi guys, Dre here. You may know me as Harrison101, and welcome back to the Motorsport 101 channel. And for the very first time in 2020, I get to review an actual Grand Prix and talk about some motorsport. Yeah, what you really all here for. First and foremost, thank you for the overwhelming response to yesterday's video. Don't think it didn't go unnoticed. It did. A lawful lot of kind words said and spread. Thank you. If you like what you see, please, by all means, subscribe. I think only about 30% of you who watch are actually subscribed to the channel, so I'd love to get that percentage figure up. So if you can, please subscribe. So this format's going to be a bit different from what I normally do. I'm going to try and piece together like a handful of topics and bridge them all together in one great big video talking about the 2020 Austrian Grand Prix, which was kind of a Grand Prix we needed. We needed a strong opener this year, and thank God we actually got one. This was, by all accounts, an excellent Grand Prix, and yeah, a lot to get into, a lot to break down. And like season openers are always interesting because they're the first time you get to see big breakdowns and see where the field is at from a competitive standpoint, so they're always going to be a bit more interesting than most. So let's get into it and let's talk about the main event, Ferrari.
How are we safe?
Yes. You are P10.
That's crazy.
Yeah, this was an eye-opening weekend for Ferrari, to say the least. They were probably the biggest takeaway to come out of this Grand Prix weekend. It's never a good sign when the race starts, before the race even starts on Thursday, where Sebastian Vettel pretty much confirmed what the press had been reporting back in February. Ferrari had never actually offered him a contract for the 2021 season and beyond, and that they'd already made their minds up on Carlos Sainz back in the off-season. And Matteo Binotto tried to make out that it was due to COVID-19 and they wanted to make restrictions on what the team could or couldn't do. Zach Brown already confirmed that was bullshit because Carlos Sainz had asked for permission to speak to Ferrari from back in December. So we already now pretty much got confirmation that Matteo Binotto's lying, which is never a good look as a team boss. And the spat between Vettel and Ferrari is now very much public. So that's going to be interesting. But we had our inklings after practice that, you know, Ferrari was not in good shape. They were hovering around the midfield. There were several tenths off Mercedes' pace. We got that confirmation in qualifying on Saturday. Charles Leclerc limps into Q3 in 10th, eventually qualifies on row 4. Vettel gets knocked out in Q2 by Alex Albon. To put it into perspective, I pulled out their times from last year. Like, in 2019, Charles Leclerc, we forget, qualified on pole position with a 1:03.003. That was an all-time track record for the Red Bull Ring in that current format. That was a track record, 1:03.003. This year, his fastest time in Q3, which qualified him 7th on the grid, was a 1:03.923. So Ferrari were nearly a second a lap slower in ultimate form, which arguably was their strongest asset last year, was how good their qualifying pace was, and they were a second a lap slower. Not good. It's not a good sign when Charles Leclerc, who really, like I said, barely made it out of Q2, and said, are we safe? Did we make it in? And he's told P10, and he goes, wow, that's crazy. Apparently, after Q3, he got out of the car, shrugged his shoulders, looked at his mechanics, and said, that was about all I could give. He said maybe a 10th in turn 1, but his Q3 lap was on the money, and that was all the car had to give. He was out-qualified by Sergio Perez and Lando Norris in racing points and McLaren's respectively. And we saw in the race that it was a tale of two races. Leclerc arguably was driver of the day, started, again, he started P7, but picked his spots where he could, overtook cars where he could, found the extra power and grunt when he needed to, and eventually finished in second after all the penalties and deductions came through. According to the race, he was named as driver of the day, and had a very, very strong drive in second. I think it was a drive that could have easily spared a lot of the team's blushes. But it was certainly a tale of two races because Sebastian Vettel was woeful. He didn't make it out of Q3. He got up to 10th. He passed Ricciardo in the early period of the race, but then he had an awful spin at mid-distance. You know, he tried to get close to Carlos Sainz, who was fighting with Leclerc on his own right, and then Sainz absolutely was right to close the door at the hairpin, thinking he'd already made the corner. He was not expecting Vettel to show up having no control of his car, and Vettel spins, falls to the back of the field, and struggled to get past Williams before the strategy changes came into play due to the safety cars. Vettel, after the race, claimed that he was lucky he only spun once. Now, a lot of Ferrari fans were very quick to leap on Twitter and make the accusation that the car is, you know, unbalanced, or that, you know, the sabotage was mentioned. I mean, I'm sitting here thinking, oh shit, we're back in 2016 again with Nico Rosberg. Like, oh, they sabotaged the car. No, stop being stupid, people. Okay, like, honestly. No team is ever going to sabotage a car. There's a Constructors' Championship to fight for. You'd be a complete colossal idiot if you ever thought of sabotaging one driver's car to make a point. Leclerc and Vettel have two very different setups. Vettel has a very unique driving style. He likes a very planted rear of the car. That's when Vettel's at his best. When the rear of the car is planted. This car is not that. I'm not going to say that the cars are different. They have different setups. That's obvious, like, given the driving style and the nature of them as drivers in their cars. What I would also say is that if you're Ferrari, knowing you're not keeping Sebastian Vettel, Leclerc's now in charge of driver development. Like, Leclerc's going to be the one developing the car. The car is going to naturally more suit Leclerc because he's their future. He's the future of their team. He's the guy that Ferrari have committed a 5-year contract extension to. It would literally be in their best interest not to go to Sebastian Vettel because he's going to be gone next year, and he might even be competing against you this time next year. So you're all in on Charles Leclerc. You made that commitment. You made that decision that you're all in on Charles. So it's hardly a surprise that he's having a better time in a car that's probably better suited and will eventually be more like his driving style because that's your proven entity and that's your star driver. It's natural. That's the decision that Ferrari took. Vettel, the car's been steering away from his style for the last year and a half, and of course the big reason for that, for the main struggles of Ferrari, is that their aerodynamics were all over the place. The car has zero aerodynamic efficiency. The team pretty much admitted that the car is, quote, fragile aerodynamically, and they were trying to get this fixed for Hungary. They've brought forward that update to race 2 this weekend, the Styrian Grand Prix. So they've brought that forward, so maybe Ferrari will be a bit quicker this weekend rather than last weekend. But what a mess Ferrari is in. They are in an awful situation where, you know, Leclerc spared some blushes by finishing in second, but we know that's probably not the true pace of that car. It's very hard to get a sense of where the baseline is when their two drivers are so far apart in terms of where their cars are, where their setups are, and where their performance is. The signs point to the fact that it looks like they've dropped to at least third in the pecking order behind Mercedes and Red Bull, and it's looking like McLaren and Racing Point are keeping them very honest. Speaking of which,
I think that's a podium, mate. I think that's a podium.
okay, who isn't delighted for Lando Norris finishing third? What a fantastic story that is. Lando is one of the real good dudes in the F1 community. I've said this for quite some time. He's got a very mature and wise head on his shoulders for a 20-year-old man. He's got a brilliant Twitch community that has no problem holding high standards and supports women, supports Black Lives Matter, took a knee before the race. He's a good dude, Lando, and he's one of the most relatable dudes in the paddock. And we all know McLaren's struggles, and it's been very high profile in the last couple of weeks that, you know, not only did they have to lay off over 1,000 staff due to COVID-19 and their lack of car sales, they also had to take out a £150 million loan from Bahrain's National Bank, a part owner of the team, to keep this season's plans afloat. They had to do that. So it's been well publicised that McLaren has clearly been struggling a lot more than what was advertised or made out. And first race back in the box, Lando Norris finishes third. And he drove brilliantly. Again, picked his spots where he needed to. A bit bullish when he passed Sergio Perez for, I think, what was fourth on the road. It was a bit naughty. Bit of wheel banging contact. Very F1 video game-esque overtake. But it was full of drama. It was a fantastic final lap. There's a lap to go. They know Hamilton's got a 5-second time penalty. Lando's trying to get back inside the 5-second window, so he gets bumped up from fourth to third due to Hamilton's penalty. And Lando Norris sets the fastest lap of the race on the final lap, which, fun fact, was the exact same fastest lap we had at last year's Austrian Grand Prix with Max Verstappen. So there's a fun little coincidence there for you. But sets the fastest lap of the race on the final lap to put him back within 4.8 seconds of Lewis Hamilton. And after Hamilton's penalty, Norris finishes third and Hamilton finishes fourth. Lando Norris becomes the first new British driver on the podium since Lewis Hamilton in Australia 2007. Big thanks to Katie Fairman for putting that fact on Twitter. Love you, Katie. Please subscribe to Katie. She's great. Follow her on Twitter. All that good stuff. One of my favourite people on all of here. She is lovely. Yeah, like I said, overall, a brilliant result for Lando Norris, one of the real good dudes in the field. An F1 podium after just 22 race starts in a team that had no business being on the podium on merit alone. Nico Hülkenberg must be pissed. So, yeah, brilliant job from Lando. Excellent driver. Great day for McLaren, all told, to get both their cars in the top 6. Very, very strong result. A very, very strong day for McLaren indeed, who are now, I want to say they're second in the Constructors' Championship right now, which is, wow, very 2012, if I do say so myself. So, Red Bull winning what I like to call the Pettyolympics. I have to talk about all of this because this Red Bull section is all sorts of drama. Red Bull lodged not one but 2 complaints on protests against Mercedes over the course of this weekend. The first one was over the legality of DAS, the dual-axis steering system that Mercedes made famous during pre-season testing earlier this year, the pulling back on the wheel to affect the toe and the steering of the car. Red Bull wanted to protest the system, basically saying, is it more than just a steering aid? Red Bull thought, they could be using it to basically, you know, warm or heat their tyres up on straights and whatnot. It could be a tyre management device or something to affect the suspension of the car. So Red Bull launched a formal protest. We didn't even get to Saturday morning, and the stewards threw out the case. They were like, no, this is exactly what we thought it was. It was a technical directive. We're fine with it, basically. It was legal. A lot of people were quick to say, Red Bull wanted to put their own DAS on the car. And even Horner was like, no, that's a very difficult thing to put on our cars. We can't really do that. We all know DAS will be banned for next season, but it is legal for this season. And Red Bull tried to get it thrown out. And they failed, which I thought was quite funny. But then Red Bull launched a second protest. Hamilton was already under investigation after Q3 in qualifying for speeding or not slowing down during a yellow flag zone in Q3. Now, it was initially reviewed by the stewards, and again, no further action was taken because in one section it was deemed that there was a green flag, while the dashboard had a yellow light on it to indicate a yellow flag. Because of the conflicting messages, they said no further action. They understood where Hamilton was coming from. However, Hamilton's onboard footage was not available. So Red Bull launched a counter-protest. And half an hour before the race was set to start, Hamilton was given 2 penalty points and a 3-place grid penalty because new evidence, i.e. the 360-degree camera and I think Hamilton's onboard, showed that he was speeding in a yellow flag zone, and the green flag came later. And because of that new evidence coming out, Hamilton was then penalised instead, which I thought, wow, half an hour before a race is started, there was no onboard of Hamilton's footage of a potential race-altering incident. Like, that is pretty laughable, and I don't know how something like that happens in modern-day Formula 1. It's a bit of an insult. Although, given that Red Bull was insistent on being this petty, I do find it funny that both their cars ended up DNFing due to mechanical problems in the end. So, yeah, I guess Red Bull won the battle, but Mercedes clearly won the war. So, yeah, that's a fun one. Red Bull leaving their home Grand Prix with a double DNF. Yikes. But funnily enough, that also wasn't the only Red Bull versus Mercedes incident we got at this Grand Prix.
Oh no, not again! No, with Lewis Hamilton! This guy is such a salute!
Welcome to a new segment called Dre the Steward, where I try to break down incidents on track and whether I agree with the steward's decisions. This is a big one. It was a race-altering incident. It was pretty much straight after a safety car. Alex Albon's on the soft compound tyre. He's in a way faster car than Hamilton is. And there is an incident up towards turn 4 where Albon tries to go around the outside of Lewis Hamilton through turn 4. There's contact, Albon gets spun out, he gets put in the gravel and he falls to the back of the field from what would be at least a podium finish for Albon, you would think. The second time in 3 races that Hamilton's collected Albon in a gravel trap. So, like I said, Albon fell to the back of the field, would eventually DNF due to an electronic failure anyway. Hamilton would go on to finish 4th. He was going to be 3rd on paper, but the 5-second time penalty dropped him down to 4th. So yeah, Hamilton got a 5-second time penalty for this incident. Do I agree with it? Well, looking at the incident in real time and looking at it again in slow motion, my personal opinion is that Albon had the move. Like, I get it. Turn 4 is a tricky corner. It's tighter than it looks in real time. I've played it on the video games. I know what it's like to drive around it. Like, it's tighter than it looks, turn 4. And the cars naturally understeer to the left-hand side of the track on exit and on throttle. They come back over to the right for turn 5. So it's easy to drift up, quite near to the curbs. On that corner. Did Hamilton give Albon a car's width of room? Maybe. If it is, it's a car width and a cigarette paper. Not much more. I think Hamilton, especially given Albon had more than half a car in front on the exit of the turn, I'd like to think that's now Albon's corner, and Hamilton probably should have done more to back off. I understand that Hamilton's not going to give it up easily, he's not going to give up without a fight, but I think Hamilton could have done more to avoid an incident. Now, I know people have been critical of Albon, saying that, hey, maybe he needs to have a bit more patience. I would say in response to that, there is no high percentage overtaking opportunity on this circuit. It's very easy to park your car on the inside of the hard overtaking spots, which there are only really 2 of on this circuit. Turn 3 and turn 4. You can't pass into turn 1. It's too tight and it's a one-line corner. You can't take the inside line through turn 1. It's impossible. It's far too slow compared to the normal racing line. Your best shots are turn 3 and turn 4, where the other 2 DRS zones are. And if you park your car on the inside of that apex, it's very hard to go around the outside of anybody. The deltas are so big in these cars that you've got to be way, way quicker to make a move like that stick. And Albon actually did in the end. And I think Hamilton was a lot more accountable for that incident and probably should have done more to avoid an incident than it was Albon being too hasty or, quote, lacking patience to overtake. I don't agree with that per se. I mean, I don't think it's easy to pass around Austria. I really don't, and for that reason alone, I can understand why Albon would take a risk by going to the outside, because if you're defending in Austria, the only way you can defend is by going to the inside and going hard on the right-hand side of the track and parking it on the apex. There's no real other way around that. So, the problem is that if you're punishing Hamilton for this incident, given it completely ruined Albon's race, and he dropped to the back of the field, I know part of that is due to the fact it was off a safety car and the field was bunched up all together automatically. I suspect 5 seconds might have been light. Maybe a 10-second time penalty could have worked here. Don't get me wrong, I don't like it because the stewards are so inconsistent. The stewarding is often all over the place. I mean, we were talking about this same Grand Prix last year when Verstappen ran Leclerc off the road 4 wheels off to overtake him and did not get punished for it, even though the rules also say you're meant to give a car width of space. You can't have it both ways on that rule, and it's not exactly enforced consistently. But then, given that the stewards have also got so many tools to review incidents, from a racing incident to a warning, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, a drive-through, a 10-second stop-go penalty, and then even a disqualification for a black flag. What's a 5-second penalty? What's a 10-second penalty? What constitutes a drive-through? It's all judgment calls, it's all subjective judgment calls, and that's what can make it so hard. And I don't envy being a steward, because you look at that incident and you go, well, given that Hamilton hit Albon, and given that Albon was beached and dropped to the back of the field, Hamilton's kind of put the stewards in a very awkward scenario where they've kind of got to do something. And I honestly would have gone 10 seconds for Hamilton rather than 5, because it was a nasty incident that dropped Albon all the way to the back of the field. I'm sure this will absolutely be talked about in a fair and measured way in the comments.
Valtteri Bottas wins the season opener here in Austria.
First win of the season under your belt. So pick up a rubber where you can.
Yes! Thank you, guys.
So, final score for this race. I have a review system. I do score races. To give it a quick bit of perspective, general rule of thumb, it's out of 10. I have half points as well, like IGN does. General rule of thumb, a 10 is an all-time classic. It's like a Japan 2005. It is a race that will hold up in any era, at any point, in any point of time. It's an all-time classic. It's a must-see for fans that want to get into the sport. I use Japan 2005 and Canada 2011 as good examples of races like that are 10 out of 10 Grand Prix. I'd say anything over an 8 I would highly recommend as a great race that you could happily rewatch. The average is about 5, I would say. Anything more than 5 is okay. Anything below that is probably really boring. I also have an asterisk that I use in certain particular circumstances. You'll see when they come up. The score in this race is interesting because this race was not great for 75% of it. The last 20 laps were manic, and the war of attrition is what made this race great. Only 11 cars saw the checkered flag. There were 9 technical DNFs in this Grand Prix. Verstappen had an electronics failure, Albon had an electronics failure, Ricciardo's car overheated, Stroll had an engine failure, both Hasses had brake failures, Russell had a fuel pressure problem, Raikkonen's wheel fell off, Kvyat's suspension broke due to riding the curbs too hard. And the lead battle was largely quite forgettable. Bottas won this race without having to really deal with a significant amount of pressure for more than a handful of laps. Just as Hamilton was getting close, they told both cars to back down because their gearbox sensors had failed because they were riding the curbs too hard. They told both of them to back it down, and Hamilton was denied of any real chance strategically to try and beat Valtteri on track because the safety cars made the strategies for the race pretty uniform. This was a 5 out of 10 race with an 11 out of 10 finish. The last 15 or so laps were brilliant, full of drama. They were hectic. There was race-altering decisions that came through, like the Albon-Hamilton incident, like Lando Norris gunning for pace, coming up through the field towards the end. The field being bunched up towards the end of the race did make it very, very dramatic and very interesting. So I'm going to give this race an 8 out of 10. This is a race I would recommend. It does take a while to get going, but the crescendo is great. It's a fantastic finish. Beyond the 10, I have what I call the "Are you effing kidding me" out of 10. And the last 15 or so laps of that race was definitely that. But I'm not going to ignore the fact that the first 2/3 were largely pretty uninteresting, and it looked like it was going to be an easy Mercedes 1-2. So in the end, I think an 8 out of 10 is about right. We always score attrition races a little bit higher because these cars in the modern day do tend to be very reliable, and when they don't, it has dramatic effects on the field, like today, and that's why this race is great. And yeah, we're very lucky. The sport needed an opener like this, and they don't come around very often. So yeah, thumbs up from me. I'd actually recommend going out of your way to see this one in a casual setting, or it's certainly worth a rewatch. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Would love to hear your takes in the comments down below. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Sayonara.